Okay, good evening. My name is Alex Fisch. I'm one of the city council members here in Culver City. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I assume some people will filter in, but I want to respect everyone's time and get this thing started. Tonight we're going to be discussing homelessness, which obviously is... Okay, thank you. I got to follow, the put your mouth right on it advice here. How's that? A little better? Okay. Obviously, this is very timely. It's, I think, probably one of the three most important issues facing people in Culver City, really throughout Los Angeles County. There are 150,000 Californians who are living without permanent shelter right now. About a third of those people live right here in Los Angeles County. The average age of death for someone who is homeless is 48 for women and 51 for men. In the last year, we've seen a 6% increase in family homelessness, 17% increase in chronic homelessness, 24% increase in youth homelessness, and an 8% increase in homelessness among those 62 and over. A quarter of those people who are unsheltered in LA County experienced homelessness for the first time last year. So as we'll hear about the good work that's happening in sheltering people, but more people are falling into homelessness every day than are sheltered. Half of those homeless are women, 45% are men, and 5% are transgender. Another community that's disproportionately experiencing homelessness is African Americans. 33% of Los Angeles County's homeless population is African American. Only 8% of the general population is homeless. 65%, is African American. Thank you. We have an expert listening.
What's the percentage?
Of African American, among the homeless population in Los Angeles County, 1/3 is African American, despite only 8% of Angelina people in Los Angeles County being African American. 65% of those who were experiencing homelessness in LA County were last housed in LA County, and of those, 75% were last housed in Southern California. 68% of those who have lived in LA County have lived here for more than 10 years. So I think I only bring that up because I think it sets the frame for what we're talking about. We'll hear more about it, but we're talking about a crisis of extreme poverty, and we've got experts here to talk about it tonight. We have Christine Mirasy-Glasco, who's the Executive Director at Upward Bound House here in Culver City. They provide shelter beds for 40 families, transitional housing. We have a member of our Committee on Homelessness, Mark Lipman. We have Robin Ricard, who I believe connected with services here in Culver City and is now sheltered for 3 years. We'll hear more about that. And we're very, very lucky to have Mr. Phil Ansell, who's the Director of the Los Angeles County Homelessness Commission. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our guests for brief presentations, and then we'll have a question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Councilman. I am very privileged to be here tonight to present to you. I can see a few familiar faces, which is a good thing because it's a community effort that it's going to take for us to solve this problem. And so I'm glad that you've taken time out of your evening tonight to come in and hear and share thoughts and think about ways in which, as a community, we can really help our homeless neighbors. My name is Christine Mirasy-Glasco, and I'm the Executive Director of Upward Bound House. Better? No? Okay. So my name is Christine Mirasy-Glasco, and I am the Executive Director of Upward Bound House. Upward Bound House is an agency that has been around for a long, long time. In Culver City, we've been here 10 years. But we have been around as an organization for almost 30 years. We were first established in Santa Monica from really a faith community like this one. So the First United Methodist Church of Santa Monica had 2 pieces of land. One of them was across the street from the church, and it was a parking lot. And the other one was 1 street over from the church, and it was a small parcel. And it's right on Washington and 11th, which is about 10 blocks from the beach. So it was like an ideal location for housing, for luxury housing. And over time, they kept getting offers day in and day out from developers, just saying, name a price, you have it. Give us the land. And the senior pastor of the church, who was a very visionary man, decided to, take this back to the congregation, and he said, if it's that great, if it's that good, maybe we can do something with it as a community, as opposed to selling it and making all this money. So what they ended up doing was creating a committee, and the committee went through a strategic planning process, and through that process, they decided that they really wanted to do three things, the faith community. Their whole mission was about helping the less fortunate, and they needed to figure out how they could use that asset to do that. So they decided that they wanted to help low-income seniors because the congregation was growing older, they were living in bigger homes around Santa Monica, and over time they probably would need to downsize, so they thought that would be a good thing to do. The second thing they decided to do was have a homeless shelter for families, because family homelessness was beginning to really kind of raise its head up during those days. So that was like the early 90s, around 1990. Then the third thing they wanted to do was have a preschool. So they already had a preschool on the premises. It was very popular, it was great, but they wanted to do more. And in the end, they couldn't decide. They decided, you know what, we'll do all three. So they used the big parking lot across the church for senior housing. So today we have 70 units of senior housing right across from the church. And then the one parcel that was one block over, they decided to use that for homeless families. And there we have 21 one-bedroom apartment units that we use as shelter. So they're apartment units, but we use them as shelter. So families can stay there for up to 2 years. Most of the time, it's about, on average, about 10 to 12. And during the time that they're there, we help them get back on their feet. So this was such a successful model that at some point we said, let's see how we can make it, bigger and have more impact. And that's how Culver City became a location for us. Just around 2008, we bought a motel in Culver City that was considered a nuisance motel. And we went through a community process, which was very vigorous, as you can imagine. And we eventually got authorization from the City Council to establish that motel as shelter. So today, on the corner of Washington and Beethoven, you would never know we're there if we didn't tell you we were there. We have 18 units of studios that we use as shelter for homeless families. That is the only family shelter in Culver City, and it has turned out to be a real gem for the community, because really, if you're homeless and you're on this side of town, there's no place to go, and so that would make it a great place for you to be. So what do we do at Upward Bound House? So we provide temporary and permanent housing. So on the temporary side, it comes in all sorts of flavors. There's emergency housing, there's transitional housing, there's interim. All of that is temporary. People can stay anywhere from, 30 days to maybe 5-6 months. And so our program here in Culver City, you can stay up to 5 months or so in the program. And what we do is basically do everything we can to get you back on your feet. Essentially, our motto is whatever it takes. So whatever it's going to take, that's what we're going to do to get you back on your feet. And most of the time, it works, because really most families that come to Upward Bound House are working families. One of the things you had Alex say at the beginning was the number of people who are newly homeless. These are the working poor. These are people who have jobs. The problem is that they cannot afford to live in Los Angeles today. We all know that rents have really gone up, and I think the latest statistic I read was something like between 2017 and 2019, rents have gone up about 26%, and wages have gone up 3%. So that statistic explains our current crisis, right? We are not keeping up with all of this, and homeless families are caught up in this situation. So what we do is really, first and foremost, help people focus on the things that are stopping them from getting back into their homes. So, like I said, most of it is financial. So we have a team of employment specialists, and all they do, day in and day out, is talk about increasing income. So once you come into the program, we set up an employment management plan, as we call it, and basically work with you to figure out, do you need to go from $11 to $15? Or do you need to go from 15 to 18? Or do you just need a job? So that assessment is done, and then we tailor the experience to each person's needs. And these people, basically their job is to go out there and convince employers that we have great people that we can help them with. They've gone through rigorous training. They have a coach, essentially, who is the employment specialist. So anytime there's a problem, there's somebody to call. And most importantly, we are there tracking the experience as well. So we have found that that has really been a really key component of helping people get back into housing. Another piece of work that we do is around helping folks address the issues that made them homeless in the first place. So sometimes it's domestic violence, sometimes it's substance abuse, sometimes it's a life circumstance, something that just happened, or some traumatic experience that you are now, living through, like post-traumatic stress disorder. Things may have happened to you 10 years ago, and now is when you're experiencing that trauma. So through that, we provide emotional and mental health support. We have licensed clinicians that we work with. That some of them are in-house, some of them are outside, where we can refer to other organizations or other county departments. And we also try to really take a 360 approach, so we are looking at the entire family and not just the head of household, because children are involved in this process, and the children are going through the same trauma. And so figuring out how we can help the kids in the family during this very difficult time with services that are geared towards children. So there's emotional support, there is after-school programs, there's tutoring one-on-one, there is kids' nights where we just do nights and movies, and then we have a firm, and once a month in Santa Monica, and once a month we take all our families to the firm, and they can just run around. They can help us harvest if there's anything to harvest. They can help us plant if there's anything to plant. We have a few animals there, and the kids love it. It's very therapeutic, actually, for the parents and the children. And we found that has been a great motivator for their wellness as well. So my time's up, but there will be time for more. So I have 1 more minute. Okay, cool. So I have 1 more minute. I think all I'll say is that it can happen to anybody. We have folks who are graduates who have become homeless. We have folks who are professionals who become homeless, who come to our programs. We have teachers. We have all sorts of people. It's not your typical stereotype of a homeless person. The face of homelessness has completely changed, and it can be anybody today. Thank you.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Mark Lipman, and I'd like to just start by getting a baseline of the room. So, hands up everyone who's frustrated with the situation of homelessness. Okay, keep your hands up if you want our government to start implementing solutions to homelessness. Okay, final question. Keep your hands up if you're a landlord or a homeowner who would like to be a part of that solution. Great. Your job is to speak with Tevis and Christina at the end of the night before you leave to make sure that you sign up with us so that we can connect you to being part of the solution. Okay, so remember who you are. Now, what I like to speak about is the solutions to homelessness. And I'm going to maybe propose something a little bit radical. I call it an emergency plan to end homelessness. Now, for the last 15 or so years, I've been working directly on this issue, studying the best practices on ending homelessness. And above all, there's one solution that has worked significantly well in every type of community you can think of, and it's called Housing First. How many people here know about Housing First? You've heard of it. Great. Okay. So basically what Housing First is, for those who don't know, it's called permanent supportive housing. Now, we might have heard that term. Permanent supportive housing means you get housing with no strings attached, but that includes the wraparound services that you need to improve your lives. And that's individually based on each person. So your needs, you get specific services to address that. Now, there's something I'd like to bring your attention to. Los Angeles County successfully did this 11 years ago. From 2007 to 2009, we had a project called Project 50, where we took the 50 worst-case scenarios from Skid Row and directly housed them and gave them the services they needed and helped get them on their feet. It had a 98% success rate. Okay? And on top of it, it saved the county money. It was profitable. There was a surplus from doing this. The first year it saved them $24,000 per person per year. The second year it saved $41,000. So in the 2-year period, it saved them $65,000. Keep that in mind. Now, when people think of permanent supportive housing, Housing First, often we see like motel reuses, buildings that are repurposed for housing, but the model that we tend to go with, which is a little strange, is that we decide to build from the ground up, because it has to be project-based, right? So we have to build all these big buildings that cost tens of millions of dollars, and that's the model that we've got stuck in our heads. But guess what? There's another model that doesn't get much attention. It's called scattered housing. All right? That's where all you landlords and homeowners come into play here. Because what scattered housing is we've got a unit here, a couple units over there, and we spread out that solution throughout the community so it doesn't affect one neighborhood dramatically and it becomes a hub. No, we spread the solution out so that we can actually find matches with people who need housing with people who have housing to offer. And one of the first things of this plan that I'm proposing is that we directly house the people who need it. Now, in Los Angeles County, we have about 60,000 people who are homeless. But in Culver City, we have less than 300 people. That's a problem that is solvable. We can solve this problem if we put our minds and our hearts together and work this as a community. Okay? So, directly housing people. Doing a little quick math, my first proposal to our city council is that for our next budget cycle, we directly fund $7 million to directly housing people. What that would do is that would give us the funding base to take everyone who's homeless in Culver City right now and give them permanent supportive housing that would be paying the rent. Simply paying the rent. And then when we combine that money with our Section 8 vouchers, because everyone who's homeless qualifies for Section 8, and this year, we can no longer discriminate against Section 8 vouchers. That opens up a lot of housing for us, even market rate housing. We combine our vouchers with our direct housing money, and we can directly house the people today in the housing that's already available. All right, so how do we do this? First thing is we create a rent registry, which is already in the works. By the end of March, we're going to have a rent registry in Culver City because that's already part of the plan. So we're going to know the good landlords, the good faith landlords who want to work with us. And so we can directly identify and work directly with them. And what else are we doing? We've got a landlord incentive plan. We have identified the key things that landlords need. What do they need? Landlords want primarily to know that they've got a stable rent coming in, which this which this addresses. They want to make sure that they have damage repairs. They want to make sure that any damages are covered. That's in our incentives. And another thing that people are concerned about is having that direct contact. So what's included with this is we have an intermediary, like an NGO. I believe the county's using Brilliant Corners or something like that, to be an intermediary between the tenant and the landlord. So then all of a sudden, if you have a problem, you have someone to go to. This is part of the landlord incentive. So the next thing I'm offering to our city council is that we actually put this on the agenda and approve our landlord incentives to get this going. Okay, so I want to get through this because I only have a few minutes left. So how do we fund this? This is very important, okay? $7 million is a lot of money, but actually not as much as we already spent to keep people on the streets. Well, there's a few ways we can fund this. First, did you know that this year Governor Newsom is putting in his budget $750 million to do this very thing? This is money that we can go to the state and say, Governor Newsom, we want to implement your solution. Give us some funding for it. And so another motion I'm offering to the city is that we write a letter from the city to Governor Newsom saying, we want to do this. Please allocate money to Culver City so that we can directly house people. Another thing we can do is a vacancy tax. Now, we know that there are good landlords out there, but there are also some bad landlords out there. There are bad landlords keeping units vacant, making extraordinary rents that no one can afford. Well, we need to identify those guys too. Why? So that when we see an apartment that's been vacant for 6 months, a year, year and a half, and longer, we can actually tax them and make them pay for keeping housing vacant in our city. Okay? And another thing we got to do is put these major corporations who are moving here into check. They're getting a hell of a lot of benefit by being in Culver City. They're planning to move here, and we're in this housing crisis. We have to build more housing. Why? Because we have to supply housing to all these companies moving. Well, you know what? It's time for them to pay their fair share. So now I know we're already talking about a linkage fee to directly assess how much it's costing us in a negative impact and find a way to have them pay a fee. But we also need to think about maybe taxing these major corporations so we have money coming in from the people who are benefiting the most to cover the damage that they're doing. And one last thing before I pass the mic is offsets and surpluses. Now, I told you at the very beginning that it saved, Project 50 saved the county $65,000 per person per year per person over the 2-year period. And what this surplus came from? Well, you guessed it. Police, emergency services, emergency room visits, prisons, jails, and all this. And I wonder why they stopped the program. Well, gee, that's kind of like a third rail when it comes to funding. We can never cut police budgets. Well, you know what? There's a lot of fear going around with homelessness. And fear is normal. But how we address it speaks directly to who we are. We can either take that fear, which creates anger and hatred, and then we want to criminalize and go down a violent path. Or we can have these community conversations and understand what the problem is and what the solution is. And going through a path of understanding, that's how we build community. So let's look at making our budget reflect who we are and fund the solutions instead of just funding the problem. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Robin Ricard. First, I want to thank Tevis, Ms. Fisch, for welcoming me in the Homeless Committee in Culver City 3 years ago. I want to thank Lauren for inviting me tonight. For 8 years, I was homeless in Culver City on Wasika between Venice and Culver Boulevard. 8 years. It was cold out there. But thanks to St. Joseph that I met through Tevis, I've now been in my own apartment for the last 3 years. It's not a problem with the people that I was homeless with. We weren't homeless because we were drug addicts or had mental issues. It was a financial issue. I get Social Security. But if you're out on the street, you have to live every day. To get a hotel room a couple of days, a month, or a week, that's $80. Then you try to get your money together to have first and last, that's damn near impossible. So I finally got a Section 8 in August. I moved in December. So I was very lucky. And thank you for the county Section 8. I appreciate it. But the thing is, I find that when you're homeless, you have to have some type of self-esteem. You have to wake up every day, wherever your little spot is, as we call it, and do something to keep yourself normal. You can't just sit there and say, well, I'm going to sit on the bus stop all day. I actually would get up at 6 and go and act like I was going to work. If I got on the 733 and rode from Santa Monica to Union Station and back, I had something to do. I would use my money and go to the movies. I would find something to do. And at 6 o'clock in the evening, my work day was over. I didn't have a job, but my work day was over. And at 7 on every Tuesday, once a month, I go to that homeless committee meeting. It gave me something to do. It made me feel like I was self-worthy. You know, they welcomed me. You know, I met people. And again, thanks to St. Joseph's, I got a roof over my head. Last night it got cold as hell downtown. It was cold. And I'm from Chicago, and it was cold. And I thought about what would I have been doing if I was still on the streets of Waseca? What would it be like? You can only pack away so many blankets and hide them in so many different places. And then I had enough money to get a storage. So by the time you use that money to pay for your storage, to get yourself a room to take a shower, to buy some decent food, now you don't have money for first and last. I live in a single downtown, and a normal rate other than Section 8 is $1,800 plus single. $1,800. If it wasn't for Section 8, even my Social Security, I can't afford that. So when I first started looking, there was no Section 8 in Culver City whatsoever. You can look all day. And downtown isn't as bad as you think it is. It's really, I'm 3 blocks from LA Live, which is very interesting. There's traffic every day. There's some type of activity, some game. The traffic is annoying, but I'm comfortable. When I leave here tonight, I know I have a key in my pocket to my own door. And that's the best thing that I can say. And again, Tevis and Alex, I thank them so much. It's been a blessing. And like you said, I'm a college graduate. I'm a Lobo from New Mexico State. Yes, I'm a Lobo. But things happen. My mom got sick. I was trying to take care of her on my own. Then I had to move her into a facility. And that's when things went downhill. And for 8 years, I found a spot on Waseca. The other sad thing is there are facilities like yours and St. Joseph that people already know about, but they get frustrated. When they get there, they say, well, I've told people, go to St. Joseph. I know about it. They don't want to go. The process of what you have to go through and the length of time, you can only go to a place so many times and sit down and wait and wait and wait, and nothing happens. The next month, you're still on the street. Still on the street the month after that and the year after that, and it's frustrating. And to the landlords here in Culver City, when I was looking, I wanted to stay in Culver City so bad, I still want to come back, but now I can't come back because I'm downtown. It took me 2 hours to get here on a bus. But I was not going to not show up and give back for what I was given. So I'm good with that. I have 5 minutes left, I'm done. I'm done. I just wanted to say thank you, everybody. And to Tevis and to the City of Culver City, I appreciate you getting me hooked up with St. Joseph. For 3 years now, and I'll be 66 March 28th. So I'm an old homeless guy. Well, I used to be homeless. And I thank you very much. Thank you.
everyone. It's nice to... How's that? Better. So good evening. It's nice to be here. I have been a Culver City resident for 26 years. Both of my sons went through the Culver City schools, started at Linwood Howe. So I'm parking here tonight made me remember so many times bringing them to activities at the YMCA. So it's really nice in a professional capacity to be able to sort of be here as part of my own community. So my task tonight is complementary to the prior speakers, where we're going to pull back and I'm going to provide sort of the big picture in terms of the countywide movement to prevent and combat homelessness. And I want to talk to you about what we're doing from a countywide view, what results we've achieved, and notwithstanding those results, why the number of people experiencing homelessness across Los Angeles County continues to grow. So everybody, and I'm the white guy in the suit, so I have to have a PowerPoint. Everybody knows we have a crisis of homelessness across Los Angeles County. As of the last point in time count for which we have results, January of 2019, there are about 58,000 people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles County, and 3/4 of whom were unsheltered. Now, this is no longer a crisis confined to Skid Row or downtown Los Angeles. And we see here that the county is divided into 8 geographic service planning areas. Culver City is part of Service Planning Area 5. We see here that throughout every region of Los Angeles County, there are a very substantial number of people experiencing homelessness. Here in the Service Planning Area 5, about 9% of the countywide homeless population lives, over 5,000 people. So what is Los Angeles County doing to address this crisis? Well, nearly 5 years ago, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors stepped up and said, we do not have a legal obligation to accept countywide leadership around homelessness. But we do have a moral obligation to do so, and we are the only governmental entity that has the reach and the standing to spearhead a countywide movement to prevent and combat homelessness. And based on that political commitment and courage from our Board of Supervisors, the county launched the Los Angeles County Homeless Initiative on August 17, 2015, and I've been the director of the Homeless Initiative since its inception. We set out to develop a comprehensive plan to prevent and combat homelessness. And we did so based on 2 key premises. First, this was not something the county could do alone. That the complexity of homelessness, both causes and solutions, necessitates an unprecedented countywide collaboration among the county, the 88 cities in the county, the wonderful network we have of homeless services providers, of which Upward Bound is one of those, as the St. Joseph Center that was mentioned, and countless others. Faith organizations, businesses, neighborhood groups, civic organizations, and others. And then secondly, we acknowledged that mainstream health, social services, and criminal justice systems that are part of Los Angeles County government have a fundamental role to play in addressing this crisis. So based on that, we pulled together an unprecedented collaborative community planning process in the fall of 2015, where over 400 invited government and community experts put their heads and hearts and experience together to develop a consensus plan, 47 strategies across 6 categories: preventing homelessness, subsidize housing, increase income, provide case management and services, create a coordinated system, and increase affordable and homeless housing. And on February 9, 2016, the Board of Supervisors unanimously approved those 47 comprehensive strategies, allocated $100 million in one-time county funding to get us going, and directed us to work with the board to identify and pursue an ongoing revenue source, which led on March 7, 2017, in Los Angeles County voters in a really remarkable election where it's a low turnout election, an off-year election where half of county voters had nothing else to vote on except for Measure H. Nearly 70% of Los Angeles County voters approved Measure H, a 1/4% special sales tax legally dedicated to preventing and combating homelessness. No matter what else happens, those dollars can only be used to prevent and combat homelessness. Measure H is projected to generate $355 million annually for, maybe I can have his 5 minutes. Well, you can decide. We'll see where I am. Over 10 years, it's currently actually generating about $400 million a year. So, and I should say that Measure H is projected to enable 45,000 family members and individuals to move into permanent housing in the first 5 years, and enable an additional 30,000 family members and individuals to avoid becoming homeless. In the current fiscal year, most Measure H funding, as approved by the Board of Supervisors and is informed by a very robust community engagement process. You can see here on the screen the distribution. Prevention, $23 million. Street outreach, $29 million. Permanent supportive housing, which is an ongoing rental subsidy with ongoing services for people who have experienced long-term homelessness and have a disability, $77 million. $85 million for rapid rehousing, which is a time-limited rental subsidy with time-limited services in permanent housing for people who have a good chance of regaining the ability to pay their own rent, and over $125 million for shelter and other forms of interim housing. This Measure H funding flows through, for each of 21 strategies, one or more county departments and agencies who in turn, for the most part, contract with community-based providers to directly deliver these services. So the punchline here is the outcomes that we've been able to achieve with Measure H in the first 27 months, from July 2017 through September 2019. Over 22,000 people have been engaged, not just contacted, but actually engaged in some meaningful way by Measure H funded outreach workers. Over 500 of whom are spread throughout Los Angeles County in the first ever coordinated outreach system in LA County. Nearly 35,000 family members and individuals in that 27-month period have moved into interim housing, shelter, or other forms of interim housing, funded in whole or in part by Measure H. And finally, nearly 18,000 family members and individuals have moved into permanent housing directly as a result of Measure H funding services and or rental subsidies. This is an extraordinary achievement in a very short amount of time, and a testament to the breadth and depth of the collaboration that characterizes this countywide movement. But if that's the case, why is the crisis so bad? Well, the crisis is so bad because even though we are helping far more people exit homelessness than ever before, 133 people per day exited homelessness in Los Angeles County in 2018. 150 people per day became homeless. And it's that difference of 17 more people per day in 2018 becoming homeless than exiting homelessness that accounts for the 12% growth in the countywide homeless population from January 2018 to January 2019. We have over 700,000 renters in Los Angeles County who are severely rent burdened. They pay more than 50% of their income for rent. And that means that they are one unexpected event away from homelessness. A job loss, a relationship breakup, burial expenses, a family emergency, an illness for themselves that keeps them away from work for enough days that they can't pay the next rent. We have that many people in Los Angeles County living on the precipice of homelessness. In January 2018, we started with almost 53,000 people who were homeless. In the course of that year, almost 55,000 people became homeless. The homeless services system helped, I don't know if you can see the numbers here, but almost 22,000 people exit homelessness into permanent housing. That's double the number assisted by the homeless services system in 2015, before Measure H and before the Homeless Initiative. An additional 27,000 people escaped homelessness in 2018 in LA County with limited or no help from the homeless services system, which is very common for people to self-resolve their homelessness, often quickly. But the end result, as I mentioned, with 133 people exiting and 150 people becoming homeless, is an increase from 53,000 to almost 59,000. If we look at this issue of inflow, what we see is that 23% of the homeless population as of January 2019 had become homeless for the first time in the course of calendar 2018. But an additional 40% of people were in their first episode in their lives of homelessness, but they had become homeless before calendar year 2018. So we add those two numbers together, it means that 63% of people who were homeless in Los Angeles County as of January 2019 were in their first lifetime episode of homelessness. And as has previously been noted, the primary cause of that is economic. It's the inability of people to pay the rent with the income they have. So as I mentioned, partnerships are really at the heart of the homeless initiative, and that includes partnerships with cities. In the West Side, there are 3 of the 4 cities that are part of the West Side Councils of Governments. Actually, all 4 cities that are Culver City, Santa Monica, and West Hollywood, all but Beverly Hills, have taken advantage of funding from Measure H offered by the county to cities to develop city-specific homelessness plans. And I can say that the plan from the city of Culver City is one of the most robust and thoughtful and extensive of the about 40 cities in Los Angeles County that develop county-supported homelessness plans. And then the county has now offered funding to cities to support the implementation of those plans. And you see here the city of Culver City has received $425,000 for feasibility studies of potentially converting motels to be reused for affordable or interim housing, to study the establishment of an inclusionary zoning ordinance, which would require market rate housing developers to set aside some number of units for affordable housing, to study the possibility of manufactured and modular housing, and for a landlord incentive program to accept subsidies and rent to homeless or low-income tenants. I want to say in that regard that I think Culver City is really at the cutting edge for a medium-sized city in thinking comprehensively about ways to combat homelessness. I had a really stimulating conversation the night of the homeless count with the mayor, David Sally Wells, and with Alex, our moderator, tonight about opportunities around housing. And in fact, I was in Sacramento this afternoon presenting to the annual gathering of the State Senate Democrats on homelessness. I flew directly from there here and was happy to get back in time for tonight's presentation. And based on that conversation, I shared an idea with Senator Scott Wiener, the author of SB 50, which recently went down in the state Senate. But there is continued interest in doing something on the land use side in Sacramento this year. So I just want to really acknowledge, I think, the role that Culver City is playing and the potential for Culver City to really stimulate other cities to think broadly and creatively about combating homelessness. And then I just want to close with 2 points. First, I want to encourage everyone who is not already part of the Everyone In campaign to sign up at Everyone In online, which is the movement led by United Way of Greater Los Angeles that has mobilized well over 100,000 people across Los Angeles County who want to be part of the solution, and specifically who want to support the siting of interim, supportive, and affordable housing. And then finally, I want to introduce Rowena Magana. Marina, could you stand up, please? Rowena is a member of the County Homeless Initiative team, which I lead, and is the designated liaison for the city of Culver City. So as each of the 8 cities has a designated person from our team to work with. And so Rowena is available tonight and otherwise to work with the city of Culver City. Let me just close with a quote that has been really meaningful to me since we launched the Homeless Initiative nearly 5 years ago. The Buddha said that a single candle can light 1,000 others without diminishing itself. And what I found as this countywide movement to prevent and combat homelessness has emerged and grown is that there are many, many people whose candles are lit, and many of them who are lighting the candles or relighting and helping to sustain the light of the candles of others who, confronted with the horror of people sleeping on the streets throughout Los Angeles County, a horror that challenges our own humanity and makes it difficult to sustain hope and dedication, that what I find is that this dynamic of people, candles, lighting each other's candles and relighting each other's candles is a fundamental element of this movement. So I hope as part of your participation here tonight, and having heard the wonderful testimonies that we've heard and the rest of the conversation that will ensue tonight, that I hope that your own candle has either been lit or relit or strengthened, and that part of your mission when you leave here tonight will be to light and relight the candles of other people who live in Culver City, who live in Los Angeles County, so we can all work together to bring our homeless neighbors home. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was wonderful. I'm just going to dive right in so we can actually get out of here at 8 and honor people's times here. First question is for everybody, and it's a tricky one, I think. I wonder, visible homelessness evokes strong reactions in people. Including online, people get on social media and post things, and people internally, we all feel, I think it's shame to some extent. Some people may have other emotions. Why do you think people feel that, and what should we do to, as a society, channel that towards productive activity?
I would say people are scared. I was homeless, and I was scared. At 3 o'clock in the morning, you automatically wake up to see if someone is around you. And you just get that sense that something bad is going to happen. And when you don't think it's going to happen, that's when it happens. So you get that stereotype when you're walking down the street, especially downtown. As you walk down the street, they're just having full-fledged seminars with themselves and standing on the street corner. And I even find myself now going around them. And I felt bad about doing that because I was homeless. So you can't just sit there and turn it back on people when you're in that same position. There's some mental issues there, there's some narcotic issues, but most of the time, people are just scared because now you're out here and nobody wants to help. And that's the feeling that you get, that nobody wants to help.
I think most of it is education and awareness. When I talk to people, most people will tell me, my sister-in-law was homeless, or my brother is homeless. It's really close to home for a lot of people. And I think that, especially now that we're living in this really huge crisis, most people know somebody who is either precariously housed, so they're on that pathway to homelessness, or they're already homeless. And the education part of it, I think, is just really educating people that, one, they're not all mentally ill, and even if they were, don't we need to be doing something about that? That it's telling us that we are not paying attention to, some of these societal things. Nobody chooses to be ill, so there's that. There's the misplaced conception that they're using substances. I tell people that if I was on the street, the way I understand and see and talk to people on the street every day, I would be using substances. Like, you, at some point, need to cope with the situation. I think you talked about self-esteem earlier. At some point, that reality needs to translate for you in a way that you can live that way, because it's really shameful. And parents tell us this all the time. Homeless parents tell us all the time. it's a very judgmental society. I cannot present myself as homeless because I'm judged. I'm a bad mother. I don't care for my kids. They're going to call the county welfare system. It's very difficult, therefore, to seek help sometimes. People you trust or you know, because that's the repercussion. So I think it's more of these forums where we're actually talking to each other and really being compassionate with other people, and understanding that it can happen to anybody, and also understanding that there's a cost to it. Family homelessness, for example, it's been documented that it's a pipeline to the prison system, because what happens is that when families stay homeless for long periods of time, about 30% of them will end up in the child welfare system because it's considered neglect, or it's all of those things kick in. And then we know from the child welfare system there's a high number of folks who go from there to the criminal justice system. So we are paying for all of this along the way, very indirectly in some ways, and not connecting the dots. So I think that educating people is really the key, and sharing stories like yours, and telling people, this was my experience, and today you would never know I was once homeless. If I didn't tell you I was homeless, you'd never know. And so I think that's where the impact lies.
Well, I'd like to just tag into everything that's already been said here, because it's spot on. Thank you for this question, Alex, because it's very important. We've been discussing this also in our committee about having to take back the narrative. I shared a story at the homeless camp that I'd like to also bring up here. On Christmas Day, I was flipping through the radio stations, and I came upon KFI on Christmas Day, and they were having a program on homelessness. And the DJs, they were basically breaking people down into 4 categories: mentally ill, criminals, drug addicts, and illegals. And they, on Christmas Day, on the day they're supposed to be at their best, okay? And if that's them at their best, I hate to think of what they are at their worst, because what they were proposing was that we just take whatever city land is available and just create internment camps. And we have to understand, one thing they said that was very spot on though, they mentioned about like a homeless industrial complex. And think about that. Think about how our entire economy is structured. How we are trained that this is the economy that we have to have. And if we don't have it, if we can't survive in this, there must be something wrong with us. And how much money is put into our criminal justice system? And how much profit is made off of keeping people homeless? You know, if you want to build these huge apartment complexes, and we're in this zoning discussion right now, and there are heated arguments on sides. Well, who do they point to build all these big market rate housing? Well, look at all the homeless people out there. We have to build all this housing because we have homeless people. But no, the housing never goes to people who are homeless. It's only to people who are doing very well for themselves, who can pay $4,000 or $5,000 a month.
I'm going to take a point of moderator privilege and redirect you to stigma, please.
Sure. But this is part of the stigma. Because if we maintain an economic system that benefits a few and at the cost of so many others, then this is where the conversation of stigma comes in. Because if we can point at something they're doing wrong, well, that's a criminal. That's why they're homeless. They're lazy. They're a drug addict. They're mentally ill. Now we justify our own greed. You see how the stigma works into the economic system. So we have to keep this, understand this. And what is our job? Our real job is to retake the narrative. To tell the story from a humanistic point of view.
of our shared responsibility as a community. Because whether you're housed or unhoused, homelessness affects all of us. So what are we going to do as a community to take back that narrative and build the society that we want to see? Because what we're doing right now hasn't worked.
There's not one human being in Los Angeles County who feels happy when they see another human being living on the street. Not one. Homelessness is something that everyone cares about and no one is for. People have different ideas about its causes and what should be done about it, but at that most fundamental human level, homelessness is something that everyone cares about and no one is for. And because of that caring, it's painful and it's uncomfortable to encounter people who are homeless. So it's a natural reaction to look away, literally and figuratively, to look away from people who are experiencing homelessness. Because not looking away, not flinching in the face of the horror of homelessness hurts. It's painful. I found myself in my role as the director of the Homeless Initiative in a period where I was bouncing back and forth between hope, because I am hopeful about what this movement can accomplish, particularly if we can generate a good amount of additional resources from the state, which I think is more possible this year than ever before. But I found myself emotionally bouncing back and forth between hope and despair and sadness. And what I came to realize was that the challenge around really engaging homelessness is feeling both things at once. Feeling both hope and inspiration on the one hand, and the sadness on the other when we look homelessness in the face, again, both literally and figuratively. And we live in a culture where that sort of both and stance, simultaneously feeling hope and deep sadness, is not common. In Western culture, it's very either or. But it requires a certain level of spiritual discipline to not turn away. And I think that it is the discomfort that leads to that turning away that then in turn leads to the kind of distancing and othering and blaming of people experiencing homelessness.
Thank you all. This one is primarily for Phil and Christine, although if you have insights, Mark and Robin, I welcome them. When we talk about places that have successfully achieved functional zero homelessness, people often refer to European countries, and there's no question if you travel in Europe, you don't see the type of visible homelessness that's familiar in any American city. However, Utah has made great strides. I know you're tired of hearing about Utah, I'm sure. But San Diego, in the last count, saw a 6% decline, and Houston has approximately halved its homeless population, with most of that reduction in homelessness coming from bringing people off the streets to giving people shelter. What are they doing differently, and are there lessons there for us?
So with respect to San Diego, I want to say that that's a false decline, that San Diego distorted their homeless count methodology and assumed that there was only one person in each tent or vehicle, whereas there's actually a multiplier that can be determined through interviews. So I would take San Diego off the table. And in fact, Los Angeles County had the lowest increase in its homeless count from January 2018 to January 2019 of any urban county in the state other than San Diego. So I set San Diego aside. I worked very closely with the woman who led the effort. She's currently doing quite a bit of consulting in Los Angeles County, who led that effort in Houston. Her name is Mandy Sample Chapman. And the key there was the combination of everything that we're doing in Los Angeles County coupled with reasonable housing prices. So the dynamic in Houston was that there was availability of affordable housing. So that with a reasonably resourced system and coordination and a focus really on housing rather than shelter, and a clear understanding that shelter is valuable as a step towards housing, not as an end in itself, they were able to make that sort of progress.
And I think to add on to that is, talking earlier about European countries as well, is prevention. We really need to close the front door to homelessness, and there are many levels to it. We can go upstream, which means we go and look at families that are at risk of being homeless. So they're already showing indicators of homelessness, right? There may be a substance abuse problem. There's probably unemployment in the family. There's probably a recent separation that now you went from 2 incomes to 1 income. Those are folks that you want to start working with and helping those folks, because the next step is they're late in their rent, and now you're in a mediation process with the landlord, right? And so the further upstream we can go, the better for us. And so if we can catch them upstream, we catch them somewhere in the middle, which is basically what we call secondary prevention. So they're already dealing with the court system, they're already dealing with the landlord, 3-day notices are going out, which is where most of our intervention is happening right now, is, we are working with families that are almost at the verge of becoming homeless. And then the last piece of that prevention is families or individuals that we have recently helped move back into housing. So one of the things about being homeless is, there's no home, so let's just find a home. And then we find a home and you go, boom, solved, let's move on to the next one. But it's like really what we need to be doing is looking at now helping those folks and seeing how we can prevent homelessness for them. Because just finding a place to stay is not enough. We need to be figuring out how we build supports for the family, or for the individual, how we help with things like transportation. How do you get reliable transportation? How do we help you with financial wellness? Do we come around, we figure out things like matching savings accounts, because most of the folks who become homeless, it's about a $500 emergency. So if you had that savings account and you had $1,000 in it, you probably would have really escaped homelessness. And it's a lot of those cases. And so I think that's one area that places like Houston put even more investment in addition to housing. And obviously our age-old problem in California is affordable housing. We don't have enough of it. Los Angeles County alone needs 500,000 units of affordable housing for its renters. That's a lot of units that we're not building. So
I just wanted to tag in on this because you mentioned Utah. And back in 2014, I actually did a lengthy interview with Lloyd Pendleton, who was the director of Utah's program. And he really educated me on the housing first. And basically what he said, there's two main things, is that you have to start with the low-hanging fruit. We hear often that there's resistance to housing, resistance to services. Well, what they did was they took the low-hanging fruit, those who were ready and willing to participate in the programs, and you go for the easy wins first, and you build from there. And as you get the wins, as you start to show progress, then other people want to participate because they see that you're actually solving the problem and not just giving people the runaround. So what he told me was it's low-hanging fruit, and they have a system they call housing first, employment second. So it's like you were mentioning, it's like it's not just provide someone with the house, but it's giving them people the steps to improve their lives and improve their situations. And the other
important thing that he told me was that each place is the same and different. When they looked at housing first, they thought, oh, it could never work here because it's something that New York had come up with. And then it worked there. So it doesn't matter where it is. It's just, do you have the willpower to see it through, to find those solutions? It's more about, do we want to solve it?
That's a good segue, willpower. So we'll start with Mark and then kind of mix it up a little bit. I believe you live in a detached single-family home, right? Well, I do, and many people do. In Culver City, a detached single-family home in really any condition is worth at least $1.4 million. And that means a $280,000 down payment and then a mortgage payment of $5,300 a month. It's got a private park around it. It's quite nice. It's by any measure luxury housing. Why does you invoke sort of luxury housing to bring up emotion? And we hear that whenever we want to cite whether it's an apartment building for young professionals or affordable housing that's below market, or in San Francisco there was tremendous blowback against the navigation center. How do we deal with that sort of mental disconnect between our actual lived experience of many of us being in luxury housing and resenting new housing, and the fear that comes from the idea of even your dispersed housing proposal? Essentially, how do we deal with community opposition to sheltering people?
Well, first we have to keep in mind that how many people have been living here more than 20 years? Okay. When you got your houses, they weren't $1.5 million. They were more like 250,000. That was your buy-in. And so what we find is that we have a middle class that is struggling, who is house rich but money poor. And if we are looking to build larger, more expensive housing, well, that middle class that we need to rely on to be able to help us solve our housing shortage, those are the people who are most willing to work with us.
But what about the navigation center or the shelter?
Well, a shelter is a nice step, but I think, as Phil said, it's not the solution. It's a half step up off the sidewalk, but the problem I have with shelters is that you wake up the next day just as homeless as you were the night before.
But what about the 100% affordable housing project?
Well, that depends on the affordable level, because if you really want to address people who are homeless, then that affordability level has to be extremely low income, because that's the only level that someone who is homeless can qualify for.
So my question is, how do we deal with community opposition to that project?
Well, forums like this and get people involved. And, our landlord incentive program, that's one way to do it. Because what we can do through that is help shore up our middle class to give them the financial boost they need to help people who are less fortunate than themselves. I help you to help all of us. And we work together as a community. If we're looking to just build as much as we can, well, who's really going to move into it? Those are the people that are able to move in and buy $1.5 million and more. So if we work with the existing community to build those solutions, then we can help our existing community and those who are homeless at the same time.
Yeah. I just want to debunk a couple of things about community opposition. United Way did a poll that found that 70% of Los Angeles County residents support the siting of permanent supportive housing in their neighborhood. Not their zip code, not their city, in their neighborhood. So there is a very substantial silent majority, or relatively silent majority, in Los Angeles County that supports siting homeless housing. The problem is that oftentimes opponents are much more vociferous, more vocal, they organize more than supporters, and supporters have a more diffuse support, whereas opponents are opposed to that specific project that's next to them. Okay? So, you know what? We don't have to go to a referendum in order to get homeless housing built. We need elected officials who have the courage to vote for projects that, whether it's planning commissions or city councils, in Culver City or in any of the other 87 cities in the county. The Everyone In campaign, which I mentioned before, its most fundamental focus is on mobilizing that 70% of people who actually support siting of interim and supportive and affordable housing. And in fact, we have published as Los Angeles County an interactive map that's available online to the public of all the interim housing and supportive housing in the pipeline in Los Angeles County. We have more project-based permanent supportive housing. These are buildings dedicated in whole or primarily for supportive housing in the pipeline in Los Angeles County than our current inventory. When that pipeline is built over the next 5 years, we will have more than doubled our inventory of project-based permanent supportive housing. This is not just an idea. These are sites with addresses, funding, developers, architectural plans. These are sites where the responsible elected officials have the courage, even if there was political opposition, to vote to approve these projects. In the next 3 years alone, we will add over 6,000 units of project-based permanent supportive housing in Los Angeles County, and we'll add, I believe, over 3,000 units of shelter or other forms of interim housing. So to get something cited, we don't have to convince the 30% of people who are definitely opposed. We have to activate the 70% of people who are supportive to provide a context in which elected officials can do the right thing.
I actually just want to echo that. Upward Bound House would not be in Culver City today if we didn't have officials that basically approved the project. It took years of opposition, and there's just no amount of advocacy will change that. And at some point, you need leadership. You need leadership in the community that is going to stand behind the project and do the right thing. And obviously, not as a surprise, once the project actually comes online and is there, it turns out to be a great thing for the community. And people actually now will say, it's a great thing that this resource is in our community. So I 100% echo Phil's comment.
Thank you. Just one more, and then we'll do audience questions. We have about 10, 12 minutes left. I want to talk about shelters real quickly. And if Robin, if you're comfortable, I'd like to, there's a common perception that we see, I wouldn't characterize this common since we're debunking. Some people will say there's plenty of shelter. People who are out in the street want to be there. They could just go sleep in the shelter. A couple questions from that. One is, could you describe your experience, if you're willing, with shelters, and are there actually available beds, and what is the experience like?
When I first started out, I had some medical issues, so from St. Joseph's, I got a voucher for a hotel for 2 days. That hotel made you want to stay on the street. It was that bad. When you walk in, when I first walked in, it was in the Santa Monica area, I'll just say that. When I first walked in, it was like, hell, I can go back on Wasika. Because it was more scary to be in that room because just the toilet didn't work, but I had a voucher, but there was a roof over my head, but at the same time to say, I just don't think so, not tonight. But if they're doing something for you, you have to accept the help. But I was more afraid to be in that hotel room than I was on the street. The other thing is, I have a woman from St. Joseph, her name is Nadia Martinez. I love this woman. I hope her husband doesn't hear me or she's not here. But she keeps in touch with me at least twice a month. And this is after 3 years of them giving me a house, a roof over my head. A shelter, I know it's different for women, but for men, I guess I've never so-called been in a shelter. I've had the voucher for the hotel for a couple of times, which I would never do again. I'll never be homeless again, how does that go? But if you're in a men's homeless shelter, from what I understand, you could die in there quicker than a woman would probably get raped. Because whatever you take off at night, if you don't tie it onto yourself, it will be gone by the time you wake up. There's no one there to say, oh, this is where you sleep, this is where you sleep. If there is a cot or some type of bed, that's all you have. When you get up to go to the bathroom, take everything that you have with you to that bathroom, because when you come back out, it's gone. So therefore, that's why they don't want to be in shelters. They want their own actual roof. The hotel vouchers, I wouldn't suggest that to anyone. I mean, even though it helps them, I wouldn't suggest it.
Okay, so if we're debunking, I want to debunk a little bit around this. When the homeless initiative began, most shelters in Los Angeles County were old school shelters, open 14 hours a day. People had to leave in the morning, carry their stuff, line up in the hopes of getting in bed at night. That's all changed now, except for the winter shelter program, which adds additional beds during the winter months. All interim housing in Los Angeles County, shelter and other forms of interim housing, is open 24 hours a day. So it means that people can go with their belongings and stay for an extended period, generally as long as they need to, with some time limits. So we really had a sea change, and I think what you're reflecting is sort of secondhand information based on sort of back then. But today, particularly the new shelter and other forms of interim housing that we brought online is a really very different experience than what was just described. And virtually all of the shelter beds in Los Angeles County are full every night. There are many, many, many people who want to get off the street into shelter and can't because there's no beds available. My son works the desk at the Access Center at St. Joseph Center. He engages with over 100 people a day experiencing homelessness. He encounters dozens and dozens of people every day who would give their left arm to get into shelter and get off the street, but he can't find a bed that's available for them. So, and the final thing I'll say is that the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, which is a central entity in the homeless service system in Los Angeles County, is close to completing the third homeless housing gaps analysis that identifies how much more supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and interim housing do we need for an optimally functioning homeless service system in LA County. What that analysis will show is that if we had enough of the permanent housing resources, supportive housing, rapid rehousing, that the amount of interim housing we have today and that is in the pipeline would fully meet our need for interim housing. So the solution to expediting people off the street is not actually adding more interim housing beyond what's already in the pipeline. Rather, it's expediting people's movement out of interim housing into permanent housing. Just think about it. If someone's in shelter for 6 months versus in 3 months, we could double the number of people moving from the street into shelter if we could go from 6 months to 3 months without adding a single shelter bed, by increasing the rate at which people exit shelter into housing. So that's the optimal solution. It's cheaper, and it gets the ultimate outcome of housing. Shelter per person costs more than a rental subsidy plus services.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that. My number one solution is just directly housing people. Pay the rent. That's the cheapest, fastest way to get people off the streets. If we're going to look at shelter options, some things I've heard about people's reluctance to go into shelters is if they have a pet, they can't bring their pet in with them. If they've got more than one bag, they can't bring a second bag with them. So we have to pair that with safe storage. Now, instead of shelters, I'm a big fan of tiny home and prefab housing that is relatively very cheap to build, that can actually give a small house and a key to someone so that they have their own place. And on the same size lot, you can probably build just as many individual housing units as you could one big shelter. So I'm more towards either a tiny home or actually better directly housing people.
So I have a different perspective because I deal with families, which means there are children involved. There is no reason why a child should sleep in the street. It's immoral. It's morally bankrupt. There is no reason why we should be doing that. We should find room, we should find shelter, we should create shelter. We all agree that permanent housing is the solution. We know that, and we know people need to be permanently housed. But going from that situation of sleeping in the car with your children to permanent housing is a journey. And it's a journey not because we want it, but just because that's the way it is until we get to that place that Phil's talking about, where the throughput in the shelters is much faster. But in the meantime, we have got to provide shelter. And some of the things you've described about shelter are true from like 10 years ago. Shelters today are very different. They look, partly because there's money to run the shelter. So as an operator, a nonprofit that's doing this, we're not making any money, right? And so when the government pays us, I don't know, $20 a night for somebody to sleep in a shelter, where you have to pay rent, utilities, food, staff, there's not enough money in that budget. So where are you going to cut the corners? You're going to cut them somewhere. And so that's what resulted in the system we had before. We were not adequately funded to do what we needed to do. And like anybody else, when you don't have enough, you find a way where you cut off on the margin. And that's what would happen. Is it the best thing to do? No. So we've now come to a place where we know today we need to make the shelters dignified spaces for people to live, and that's what we're doing. Measure H has completely revolutionized that whole system, and today people have clean places to live, they're staffed, they can be there 24 hours a day. But I must say that for Upward Bound House, this was our vision from day one. So 30 years ago, when we decided to build our first facility, we didn't build a dormitory, we built apartment bay units, because we figured people needed that dignity of housing to be able to then use that as a step to move forward, and we've never veered from that.
Thank you. I've sort of missed the edge of the time, so I'm going to do a lightning round here. And I'm sorry to the audience, but hopefully some of our speakers will stick around and answer any questions you have. In 30 seconds or less, what should people who want to make a difference and change this and end homelessness do when they leave here tonight?
Think about those in your family that could be homeless the next day. You're a paycheck away from being homeless. Just think about what can happen to you, a family member, a close friend, somebody 1,000 miles away. It can happen to you.
Any little thing you do makes a difference. It's going to take a village to solve this problem, and any little thing you do makes a difference. So whether it's volunteering at an organization, donating $10 a month, going out and doing the homeless count, everything you do is an investment to solving this problem, and we can do it.
Well, as I asked you at the beginning, before you leave, please sign up with Tevis and Christina in the back if you want to be part of the solution. And also just keep in mind all the ideas you've heard tonight and spread the word. Retake the narrative. Change the conversation.
Sign up for the Everyone In campaign. If you're a landlord, rent to people experiencing homelessness and accept rental subsidies. If you're a homeowner and you have an empty bedroom, stay tuned for opportunities to deploy that bedroom directly to help a person experiencing homelessness. And from tonight forward, when you pass a homeless person on the street, look them in the eyes, smile, and say hello.
If Phil, Mark, Christine, Robin, thank you so much. That was wonderful. And let's give them a proper round of applause. And thank you all very much. That's it for this evening. Thank you.